Steve Jobs was never an ordinary boy. Born in San Francisco and adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs, Steve spent his childhood wrestling with questions most kids never asked. Why was I given away? Why do I feel like I don't belong? Though his parents loved him deeply, there was a quiet storm inside him that never quite settled. Growing up in the sleepy town of Los Altos, Steve wasn't interested in baseball or cartoons like other boys his age. His fascination was with wires, circuits, and how things worked. His father, Paul, a mechanic and craftsman, taught him how to build things from scratch. In their small garage, Paul showed Steve the beauty of precision, patience, and perfection. It was there, amidst scattered tools and circuit boards, that Steve's imagination came to life. At school, Steve struggled with authority. He constantly questioned teachers, challenged the curriculum, and refused to accept anything just because it was written in a textbook. He wasn't trying to be difficult. He just saw the world differently. He believed there was more, that things could be better, simpler, and more meaningful. His teachers called him rebellious. He called it being curious. One day, while being scolded for asking too many questions, he muttered to himself, "I wasn't born to follow. I was born to create." Everything began to shift when he met Steve Wozniak, a fellow electronics whiz with a gentle spirit and brilliant mind. Together, they experimented with gadgets, pulled apart devices, and built machines most adults couldn't comprehend. One of their earliest creations, the Blue Box, allowed users to make free long-distance calls. It was illegal, but it worked. That moment lit a fire in Steve's heart. "We can do anything if we just believe in it," he told Wozniak. Years later, they began assembling computers in Steve's garage. It wasn't fancy, and it wasn't funded, but it was alive, with vision, risk, and rebellion. That garage, once a place of simple father-son lessons, became the birthplace of Apple. As Steve soldered wires late into the night, he whispered a promise into the air, to the parents who gave him away, to the teachers who doubted him, to the world that didn't see him yet. "One day, you'll know who I am." Success came fast, but so did the weight of expectation. Apple was no longer a garage dream. It had become a tech empire. The launch of the Macintosh in 1984 was a cultural earthquake, with Steve standing center stage, full of charisma and confidence. He was no longer just an inventor. He had become a symbol of innovation. But behind the applause and flashing cameras, tension was rising. Steve's relentless pursuit of perfection became a double-edged sword. He was demanding, often ruthless, and increasingly difficult to work with. He pushed his team beyond their limits, believing that excellence only came through pressure. But the board of directors saw something different: instability, risk, ego. They wanted structure. Steve wanted revolution. The two couldn't coexist forever. Then came the moment that shattered him. In 1985, Steve was called into a boardroom filled with men he thought were his allies. But the decision was already made. They were removing him from the company he co-founded. It felt like a betrayal deeper than anything he'd ever known. With his belongings in a box, Steve walked out of Apple's headquarters in silence, the same way he had once walked out of his childhood classrooms, misunderstood and rejected. "How can they fire me from my own company?" he asked himself, the words echoing in the hollow of his chest. It wasn't just a professional failure. It was personal. Apple wasn't just a job. It was his identity, his passion, his child. For months, Steve drifted. His confidence was shattered, his future uncertain. The media mocked him. Investors turned their backs. But in the silence of defeat, he began to hear a different voice, one that reminded him why he started in the first place. He founded a new company, Next, with a vision to build tools for the brightest minds. Around the same time, he bought a small animation company that no one believed in. He renamed it Pixar. Most people saw failure. Steve saw a second chance. From exile, he began to rebuild, not just his business, but his soul. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was seeking redemption. "Sometimes life hits you in the head with a brick," he later said. "Don't lose faith." In 1996, after years of silence between Steve Jobs and Apple, the impossible happened. Apple acquired Next, the very company Steve had founded in exile. It was more than a business move. It was an unspoken apology, an acknowledgement that Apple needed its lost visionary. When Steve walked back into Apple's headquarters, he was no longer the impulsive young rebel. His eyes were sharper, his mind more focused, and his heart seasoned by pain and resilience. He didn't return with arrogance. He returned with clarity. Apple was floundering, near bankruptcy, bloated with failed products and no clear direction. Steve didn't waste time blaming anyone. He rolled up his sleeves and went to work, not to reclaim a throne, but to rebuild a soul. He stripped the product line down to its core, fired redundant divisions, and brought back simplicity. Focus is about saying no, he told his team. He introduced the iMac, bold, colorful, and unlike anything the world had seen. Then came the iPod, a device that put 1,000 songs in your pocket. Each product was more than technology. It was poetry made of aluminum and code. Steve wasn't designing gadgets. He was designing experiences. People didn't just buy Apple. They felt it. They saw in it something elegant, something human. The world began to understand that Steve didn't just lead a company. He led a movement. But behind the scenes, a darker truth was unfolding. In 2003, Steve was diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of pancreatic cancer. True to his nature, he kept it hidden from the public. Even as his health declined, he kept pushing forward. He believed that every day was a gift, that each keynote might be his last, and that the best way to honor life was to build something that outlived it. In 2007, with trembling hands and a soft, raspy voice, he introduced the iPhone. The crowd roared, but Steve stood still for a moment, absorbing the moment as if he knew its weight. Every once in a while, a revolutionary product comes along, he said. And he was right. The iPhone changed everything. So did he. Not just in the tech world, but in the lives of millions who believed, as he did, that creativity could change the world. As Steve Jobs grew frailer, his presence only grew stronger. His black turtleneck and quiet stare became iconic, but beneath the surface, he was simply a man racing against time. The cancer returned, more aggressively this time, and though his body weakened, his mind never stopped. In those final years, Steve focused less on dominance and more on meaning. He poured himself into the iPad, into refining the Mac, into building a company that would outlast him. But most importantly, he turned inward. He spent long afternoons with his children, sharing stories not of wealth, but of wonder. He told them how being adopted once made him feel lost, but eventually helped him understand the power of choosing your own destiny. He reminded them that being different wasn't a burden, it was a strength. Don't live someone else's life, he often said. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. In 2005, he delivered the Stanford commencement address, a moment that revealed his soul more than any product ever had. With raw honesty, he spoke of death as a motivator, not an enemy. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. The world listened, not to a CEO, but to a human being who had failed, risen, and dared to dream again. He didn't preach success, he shared scars. And through that, he gave others permission to embrace their imperfections too. On October 2011, Steve Jobs passed away peacefully at the age of 56. The world went silent, not because a businessman had died, but because a storyteller, an artist, a warrior of ideas had gone. But he didn't leave empty hands behind. He left a legacy stitched into every Apple product, into every entrepreneur who dared to challenge convention, into every child who questioned the rules. Steve Jobs proved that greatness doesn't come from privilege, but from persistence, from seeing what others ignore, from refusing to accept the world as it is. And though his voice is gone, his echo remains, in every swipe, in every click, in every soul who whispers, "I want to make something that matters." Because that's what Steve Jobs did. And that's who he still is.